Well, good evening. I'm your host, Robert Wilson with Cowboy Wisdom Hypno Acuity. And tonight's podcast is 7 Ways Why Today is Mind Made from Yesterday. Today isn't new, it's yesterday's wearing a fresh disguise. As the mind drags old memories and old meanings and old survival scripts into the present and calls it reality, replaying the same emotional loops, snapshots, emotional allegiance, soul tattoos, as they're thinking their truth instead of them understanding its leftovers to throw away through the fierce clarity of your Sonoran sagacity. I can see it instantly admitting today is never happening. It's yesterday is echoing the old loops and scripts. The mind never creates, it recycles. By clinging to familiar fears, inherited beliefs, parental programming, and ancient survival wiring, then projects all of it into a blank canvas of now. That's why people react with old emotions, defend old identities, and repeat old patterns, because today unknowingly demands it. Because yesterday trained them to react, yet sovereignty never obeys yesterday. Sovereignty snaps the loop. Sovereignty burns the script, and sovereignty refuses to let the past impersonate the present. As I rise up my highest frequencies, I stop living today through the lens of what was to instantly energizing neon nowality from what is here and now with a clear seer wow. Why being afraid of what's behind me creates my mind made here and now. Fear of what is behind me forces the mind to recreate yesterday in the present, turning old memories, old wounds, and old interpretations into your here and now reality. Even when the moment is clean, as I fear what's behind me, my nervous system stays loyal to old survival scripts and programming. So your mind projects yesterday's threats on today's neutral situations, creating a present moment shaped by outdated danger signals. Has that ever happened in your life? Oh, yes, it has happened in my life. The quicker you admit it, the quicker you become liberated. Fear of the past hijacks the present because the mind trusts familiarity over the truth and the veracity of now. It would rather recreate yesterday's pain than allow sovereign clarity to generate a fresh, untamed now. 7 ways why today is mind made from yesterday. Today is mind made from yesterday because unexamined memories, habits, and survival scripts replay themselves, turning your present moment into a rerun of old programming instead of sovereign creation. Yesterday shapes today because the mind clings to familiar identities even when they're outdated, causing it to react with old emotions, old fears, old snapshots, old everything. Old fears, old interpretations instead of fresh desert forge clarity. Today becomes yesterday's echo when I operate from inherited beliefs instead of sovereign awakened awareness. Yet the moment you awaken, you stop recycling the past and start generating a fresh frequency that now writes your entire trajectory of your desired lifestyle. Why today is mind made from your parents. Today is mind made from your parents because their beliefs, fears, and survival scripts become your first operating system. The mind repeats inherited programming until sovereignty now writes a fresh code of foresight. Your parents' patterns shape today because the mind copies what it witnesses: the tone, the tension, the silence, the dominance, and approval seeking all become default behaviors until you awaken to your own desert forge clarity. Today's echoes your parents because the mind clings to familiar identities, even outdated ones. But the moment you rise into sovereign awareness, you stop living their yesterdays and instantly generate your own frequencies of forthright foresight to rise, shine, and energize your inner wise. Why the mind operates from yesterday. The mind operates from yesterday because it's a memory machine, never a clarity generator. It recycles old fears, old meanings, old interpretation, mistaking yesterday's survival scripts for today's authentic nowography. And I use the word nowography. This is for me, nowography, because I'm writing everything now. A biography, autobiography, everything written. If you use you, me, and talk about the past, that's a yesterday's. But a nowography is right here. Yesterday runs today because the mind clings to familiar identities. It would rather repeat outdated roles than risk the divine unknown, keeping me loyal to patterns that no longer match my sovereign expansion or your sovereign expansion. The mind defaults to yesterday because it fears the spacious clarity of here and now. But the moment divine awareness awakens, yesterday's scripts dissolve, and today becomes a fresh sovereign frequency instead of a recycled echo of, oh no. Why am I afraid of what's behind me that steals my now? You're afraid of what's behind you because the mind stores yesterday as danger, replaying old memories, old mistakes, and old emotional imprints as they're still happening, turning your past into a shadow of now that follows you just like a puppy dog. The fear behind you comes from inherited survival wiring. Your mind learned to scan backwards for threats from childhood, your parents, past environments, school, and all your life. So it treats old experiences as active risks instead of archived history. You fear what's behind you because the mind mistrusts the unknown ahead, so it clings to familiar pain behind you, even when it limits your expansion, sovereignty, and dissolves this by anchoring you in the present instead of yesterday's ghosts. How is yesterday a ghost and an illusion, but we think it's real? That's an interesting question because that's up to individuals. Why yesterday's trauma create mind-made chaos. Yesterday's drama and trauma create chaos now because the mind stores emotional shock as a survival blueprint, replaying old wounds as if your current threats, turning today's clean moment into a battlefield built from memory. The mind generates chaos now because it interprets neutral situations through yesterday's pain, projecting old betrayals of conflict and old fear responses onto people in the moment that didn't deserve the story. How are we stuck in the stories of our past, even though and then we try to use them for now. Pick me, I have. But when I realized this, when I read this, everything occurs from yesterday, even though I think it's here and now. So I rise out of that because the mind clings to familiar suffering. It trusts the known pain more than the unknowing pristine peace, creating chaos, never from the present, yet from the past. I have never released, dissolved, and communicated away. How does that feel to communicate away your past? Why indoctrinated education becomes today's mind-made social obedience. Indoctrinated education trains social obedience by rewarding compliance over curiosity, conditioning me and you to follow approved answers, approved authorities, and approved thinking, turning today's mind into a replica of yesterday's systems. Indoctrinated education creates man-made obedience because it punishes deviation, teaching you to fear being wrong, fear standing out, and fear sovereign insight, which keeps your present moment intelligence trapped inside institutional boundaries. How is education an institutional boundary? Indoctrinated education becomes social obedience because it replaces inner authority with external approval, training you to trust grades, rules, and experts more than your own untamed wisdom, making the mind loyal to systems instead of sovereignty. Why energetic liberation dissolves man-made social obedience. Energetic liberation dissolves social obedience because it reconnects you to your sovereign signal. Once you feel your frequency, the mind can no longer outsource authority to culture, systems, or approval. Energetic liberation breaks obedience because it exposes the mind's inherited programming. The moment you see how your thoughts were shaped by your parents, school system, society, and yesterday, and it breaks the spell of conformity, collapses instantly. Energetic liberation dissolves obedience by shifting you from your fear-based survival to presence-based clarity. When you're rooted in now instead of yesterday's rules, you stop performing for the system and instantly living your sovereign veracity and desired lifestyle. Why energized listening dissolves mind-made social obedience. Energized listening dissolves social obedience because it bypasses the mind's conditioned noise and tunes you directly into your sovereign signals. Once you hear your own frequencies, external authority loses its grip. See, that's what thinking and knowing is, an external source. Energized listening breaks obedience by exposing the mind's inherited scripts. When you listen from presence instead of programming, you instantly recognize You recognize which thoughts are yours and which were implanted by culture, school, or family. Energized listening dissolves obedience because it roots you in the now, and the present moment has no loyalty to yesterday's rules, roles, and expectations. It frees you from performing and returns you to pure, untamed clarity. Why history and history teachings become mind-made control today. History teaching becomes mind-made control because it presents curated narratives as unquestionable truth, shaping how people interpret the present through someone else's version of the past. limiting sovereign perception. History controls today because it trains the mind to obey old meanings, inherited victories, traumas, heroes, and villains because psychological templates that dictate identity, loyalty, fear, and behavior in the present moment. History teachings becomes control because it rewards memorization over awareness, and the mind learns to repeat approved stories instead of questioning them, turning today's intelligence into a replica of yesterday's worldviews. Why business education is mind-made, third world enslaving programming, manipulating today. Business education manipulates today because it programs minds to obey outdated hierarchies, teaching people to serve systems, titles, and authority structures instead of sovereign wisdom, mirroring third world obedience conditioning. Business education becomes third world enslaving programming by glorifying scarcity, competition, and fear-based success, training people to think in survival mode, which keeps them controllable, compliant, and disconnected from intuitive innovation. Business education manipulates the present by rewarding conformity over innovation, turning today's leaders into replicas of yesterday's models, suppressing sovereign insight and keeping the collective mind trapped in low-frequency economic obedience. And if you pay a real close attention to the world, you can see that occurring right now. Why business education and indoctrinated education teach mind-made negativity, poverty consciousness, and fear. Business and indoctrinated education teach negativity, poverty conscious, because they're built on scarcity based models, competition, grades, rankings, and not enough thinking, training the mind to operate from fear instead of sovereign creativity. These systems install fear by rewarding obedience and punishing deviation, conditioning people to avoid mistakes, avoid risk, and avoid originality, which traps the mind in low-frequency survival mode. In survival mode instead of intuitive expansion, imaginative wisdom. Business and indoctrinated education reinforce poverty consciousness by glorifying external validations, titles, credentials, approval, and authority, disconnecting people from inner authority, making them dependent on systems instead of their own untamed wisdom. And why I'm not good enough is a mind-made cage from yesterday manipulating today. I'm not good enough manipulates today because it's built from yesterday's voices. Old criticism, old comparison, old emotional imprints, and the mind replays them as current truth, shaping your choices before you even choose. Has that happened in your life? Dang sure happened in my life. And this is when you can admit this, you can liberate yourself from all this gunk. The belief controls today because the mind uses it as a survival script. If you think you're not enough, you stay small, safe, and predictable, obedient to old system, which keeps you from stepping into the world as a sovereign clarity and expansion. I'm not good enough becomes a cage because the mind clings to familiar pain. It thrusts the known wound more forward more than the unknown scenarios. So it recreates yesterday's emotional ceilings and calls it reality, manipulating your now without your consent. Why today's thinking, knowing, learning, knowledge, and thoughts are mind-made charades from yesterday. Thinking is a charade because the mind recycles yesterday's interpretations. Every new thought is usually an old memory, old belief, or an old meaning dressed up as insight, blocking direct perception of what's actually here and now. Today's knowledge is a charade because it's inherited, never discovered. School culture, family, and society install pre-approved meanings, so most people know what they're told, never what they actually perceived and understand and embody. Today's thoughts are a charade because the mind uses them to maintain identity. It repeats familiar narratives, fears, and viewpoints to keep you predictable, obedient, and aligned with yesterday's programming instead of untamed present moment clarity. Why awakened and aware, cowboy wisdom, politically incorrect inspiration, outlaw optimism, liberating the lingo, expressing revolutionary revelations, rise me out of my mind made rat-a-tat crap from my past, soul tattoos, emotional snapshots, cognitive recollections, and parents' programming. Awakened and aware, cowboy wisdom rides you past the mind's rat-a-tat past because it refuses inherited fences. It sees soul tattoos, emotional snapshots, and parental programming for what they are, yesterday's dust storms, never today's horizons. Politically incorrect inspiration and outlaw optimism dissolve cognitive recollections, politically correct programming traps, because they break the obedient spell. They free you from performing the version of yourself your past trained you to be. See, your past has trained you who to be you are today, letting you step in the unfiltered, free-flowing now with a wow. Liberating lingo expresses revolutionary revelations that override old programming. When your language shifts from inherited scripts to sovereign expression, the emotional snapshots lose their authority and your present moment wisdom takes the reins from you and either induces pain or you gain. That's up to you. Why ancestor survival mode programming becomes a mind-made larcenous stealing today. Ancestral survival mode programming steals today because it hijacks your nervous system with yesterday's fears. The mind reacts to modern life as if you're still in your ancestors' danger zones, robbing you of present moment wisdom. Survival mode programming becomes a larcenous because it replaces perception with protection. Instead of seeing what's actually occurring, the mind filters everything through an inherited threat detection lens, stealing your ability to respond from clarity. Ancestral programming steals today because it keeps you loyal to outdated emotional codes, scarcity, hypervigilance, self-doubt, and people-pleasing, all designed for past survival, never present sovereignty, draining your now with yesterday's ghosts. Why destroying mind-made illusions and manipulation liberates you instantly. Illusions collapse instantly because they were never real. The moment you see the mind's fabrication, the entire structure loses its power, and your awareness snaps back into the unfiltered now. Manipulations dissolve the second you recognize them. Awareness exposes the hidden hooks, emotional triggers, and inherited scripts, and once seen, they can't control your choices, reactions, or identities anymore. Destroying illusions liberates you instantly because it removes the middleman. There's no more mind-made stories, no more inherited meanings, no more past-based filters. You meet reality directly, and direct contact is always freedom and sovereignty. Why speaking using you is a mind-made deception that avoids responsibility. Using you is a mind-made deception because it protects your inner state outward. The mind avoids ownership by pretending the issue lives in someone else. Somewhere else, so you never have to face your own frequencies directly. You language keeps you unaccountable because it turns your life into a commentary instead of an embodiment. The mind narrates instead of participates, creating distance from your choices so you never have to claim them. You become deception because it lets the mind hide behind generalizations. When everything is out about you, nothing is about me. And the past programming stays untouched, unchallenged, and untransformed. Why, me, myself, and I am opens your core corridor and frees you from mind-made charades. Me, myself, and I pulls your awareness back into your own center, ends projection, ends blame, ends deflection, and forces the mind to stop outsourcing responsibility, which instantly ignites your core fire of desire. I am dissolves mind-made charades because it bypasses identity stories, and there's zero past, zero labels, zero inherited roles, just pure presence. The moment you speak from I am, the mind's illusions lose their grip. Expressing me, myself, and I am activates your core orator because it aligns your language with sovereignty. Your words stop serving the mind's narratives, and most punctuated writings are serving the mind's narratives, and start serving your inner veracity or inner authenticity. Allows you to soar beyond old programming. As the energetic liberation instantly begins, you win with wisdom, insight, and natural talent. And that's something I really have opened up to. A lot of the words we speak keep us the same. So when you can let go of that and open up to understand, you rise and elevate through your innate liberating lingo, now and forevermore. And I want to thank you. I am Robert Wilson, and may your weekend be as blessed as you are a blessing to me in the world.